بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وحده والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعده. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode of Ask Eman, broadcasted live from the studio of Eman Channel on Sky 757. We're also live on our social media platform, so please don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Facebook and Instagram page. Follow our Twitter handle, and of course we are live on our website emanchannel.tv. Since it's a live interactive Q&A program, all the contact details are displayed at the bottom of your screen, but for your kind reference, studio number 0203 515 0757. Alternatively, you can drop us a text on WhatsApp 079 1684 1483. And of course, to our international viewers, you can use the WhatsApp number. And of course, you can use the YouTube channel or the Facebook page to drop us a question. And inshallah, we will try our level best to accommodate all those questions that you sent us live on air. I'm your host, Qamarul Islam, and joining us tonight, none other than Shaykh Shamsuddha. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
It's been some time.
Yes, it has. Yes, it has.
Jazakallah khair for giving us your valuable time.
Barakallah fikum.
Now let's start. First thing first, I've got a couple of things in my mind I'd like to cover as much as I can because you're here, of course. And first thing to start with, the weather today.
I feel like you're getting.
No, there are certain discussions you'll really enjoy, and
You're about to fire.
and I'd like to find out your view. And
loaded magazine.
most importantly, there are some viewers as well who have asked me certain questions that you like answering, inshallah, and then we'll find out today. But let's start with the weather first. We know in London today, across the London, the weather it was pouring rain, and I've seen certain comments online and people making comment about it's a bad weather, and use a lot of unnecessary adjectives, shall we say. Now the question comes in, as Muslim, when we use such languages, is it something called as good weather, bad weather, or should we always be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala whatever weather we are in?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we can make something of this, and first of all, so I can imagine what kind of things would be said, right?
Yes, that's right.
I did.
That's right.
I did kind of grow up in East London, so all sorts of colourful things can be said.
Absolutely.
Which really is never appropriate. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in which he said, and I actually used a hadith like this to give up my teenage, profanity habits, basically. And the hadith it kind of concludes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala despises people who are obscene and foul-mouthed. Right? So, so we should be careful about that. Anyway, whether it's to do with the weather or anything else, I think generally, I don't know, somehow,
especially as Muslims.
Some really, lately I've been talking a lot about modernity, modern culture and Western culture, and things that have been normalized in modernity. And one of the things that, and the kind of things that people think are cool, and one of them is the use of profanities. It's like, you're at work, you're this consummate professional, you're like, everything, your language is really clipped and everything, right? And then you go to the point, and you're like, everything I'm learning, and you turn into this.
Yes,
suddenly,
that's right.
There's this transformation. I don't quite understand that, right? Anyway, and that's celebrated, and that's supposed to be, it's cool, or that's how you let your hair down. So no, I don't think so. First of all, that goes against our values and the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ. The second thing is specifically to do with the weather. I mean, all I will say is, when we criticize the weather, it's just an expression of our own feeling and an expression of our preference. And I don't think it is a kind of that we're blaming, or we're complaining necessarily, because
we can use appropriate language.
Some hadith, yeah, of course. So the language of address, and some hadith talk about how rain is a mercy, right?
So you say mercy. Let's look at it from a different angle. I think as Muslim, maybe, alhamdulillah, it helps us to lower our gaze.
Well, yes, and everything, to use, another popular kind of reference, everything has a silver lining, right? But that does not mean that people do not suffer because of bad weather.
Of course not.
Right? Droughts are bad weather.
Anything extreme, of course, is concerned.
A hurricane is bad weather. A tornado is bad weather. There is no way in which that can be described as in any way good. whatever silver linings there may be, whatever wisdom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may have behind that is something that is never immediately noticeable for us unless we take a spiritual stance and we connect with the idea of rida bil qada, that whatever Allah has decreed, I'm pleased with it.
Excellent.
So that is the appropriate spiritual response. I think everything else, to some degree or other, is inappropriate, particularly the use of profanities. But if it is simply to say, oh, the weather isn't particularly, the weather's not great today, or, it's raining cats and dogs, and those kind of things, I would say these are just muhawarat. These are idioms. These are just idiomatic ways of expressing ourselves. If our intention isn't to complain, then it's fine. We should avoid profanities and things like that.
But it's importantly, as you have mentioned, the language has to be in balance, in check, and needs to use appropriate language.
I think that's generally, I think the Muslim community really should value good language and good literacy and so on. And we really need to up our game in this regard and show other people the way. It doesn't matter if people think we're a bit prudish and, we're a bit snobbish or whatever, but that just needs to become our way. Some things just need to become like Muslim custom, and one of them is good articulation.
Thank you very much for that. Now, before I take questions from our respective mediums, whether it be WhatsApp or YouTube channel, I would like to ask this question because there was a discussion in one of the mainstream radio stations. I thought, why not have a discussion here? And it was, many of us dream of a fairy tale wedding. And then the discussion was along the lines, is it important anymore to have marriage? Or the question was, is marriage losing its appeal? Now, as Muslim, especially living in Western society, we are British, we are Europeans, how important should it be when it comes to such discussions that how should a marriage be conducted? And we have cultural aspect, we have our traditional aspect, and then we have the Shari'i aspect. Now, when these kind of questions or these kind of discussions are taking place on mainstream stations, whether it be print media, broadcast or radio, as if like marriage has no value in today's world, as if like you don't need to get married. Now, as Muslim, we have to be very much clear what our values are and what Islam tells us. Your take on this?
Well, marriage is a strong sunnah, right? It's an emphasized sunnah. There's some disagreement among the fuqaha about it, but which tells us its own story about the extent to which it was emphasized. It's a natural need for people, which is why most people marry.
Especially conveying it to our next generation to understand the importance of it.
The key thing is that human beings engage in relationships between, man and woman, right? Mm-hmm. And in almost all religious cultures, in Islam in particular as well, this cannot happen without marriage. So the first everybody does, seeks to do, aims to do. If you can't do it without marriage, then you're going to get married, right? And it's the Prophet ﷺ said, "Nikahu min sunnati," nikah is from my sunnah. So, and some narrations talk about how it's a half of one's faith and so on, which basically implies that it is something that is important and celebrated and valued in Islam. Now, the question of spending and expenditure well, the Prophet ﷺ's probably most clear guidance with regards to that is, he said, the marriages with the greatest barakah, with the greatest blessing, are those that are least in burden. So this question of burden should be taken into consideration. And
getting into debt, remortgaging the house, credit cards, etc.
Borrowing money to get married and that kind of thing. These are the things that should be avoided. But we should also acknowledge that the idea of burdensomeness or burden is relative. £10,000 is one person's burden.
Yes.
It's another person's small change.
That's right.
So that's one thing. The other thing also is we should be careful what we spend money on. I think the more the more we spend money on show and just meaningless, meaningless extravagance.
To maintain a social status?
To maintain social status or whatever, the less barakah there will be in the marriage. So I would say, if you can afford it, spend the money, but spend it in things that are of value. Feeding people is something that is good in itself.
Like a true entrepreneur or businessman, they would invest their money where there is a good return or there is something that has a value at a later, in a longer
But
run.
let's not turn it into an investment purely, and let's not use that analogy, but let's just say it's a celebration.
Okay.
Let's just call it a celebration. It's happy. Let's keep it happy. Let's allow people to celebrate. People should celebrate it. But
Nothing wrong with that, of course.
But spend the money within your affordability. Resist the urge to be extravagant for the sake of extravagance and for the sake of a show of wealth and a show of extravagance, right?
Okay.
For the sake of ego, for the sake of that kind of thing, try to spend the money on things that are practically of value. For example, if you spend money on feeding people, that's a good thing, right? And you can afford it, and that's a good thing. Bring your family together.
But the host still has to listen to complaints.
Yeah, but that's just, I can't.
Okay, inshallah, balance basically.
We can't, I'm not.
We can't please everyone.
Yeah, let's not moan on TV.
Okay, no, inshallah, no. I wanted to discuss this, and the second leading to that is when couples get married. Alhamdulillah, good news. Now there's something called as within Muslim.
Can I say one thing?
Go ahead.
What I find really ironic about some Muslim marriages is people will spend 20,000-30,000 pounds on a wedding, only for the young couple to live in a bedroom, in one bedroom, in an overcrowded 3-bedroom house.
SubhanAllah.
And this is what I mean. Like, this is a complete loss of perspective. Save 15,000 pounds of that money, and that's a year's worth of rent, right? It's a year's worth of comfort for the young couple as they settle and establish themselves. Or it's a year's worth of rent for somebody in that house so that the house can have more space.
Correct.
This I don't understand. You have this great show of extravagance with a 30,000 pound wedding, but you can't afford an extra room for yourself. You can't afford some extra space for yourself. You can't afford to provide your wife with, with just basic comfort, her basic rights of accommodation, privacy, and things like that. And the wife accepts the compromise. I want to have a big wedding. And she'll also accept that compromise. Oh yeah, being in a bedroom underneath with my mother-in-law and father-in-law sleeping underneath.
Or maybe even next door.
Or next door to my husband's younger brother.
That's right.
That's acceptable, but I want a 30,000 wedding.
Nah.
So this is a really, for me, so I've already made this intention that if I'm going to spend money on a wedding, I'd rather have less guests, less food, and less of that razzmatazz. And if I have the money, and my son can't afford his own place, I'll rent him a flat.
Okay, interesting, inshallah. Jazakallah khair for clarifying that. It's an important point. The next thing, the couples get married. Now, the society that we live in, there is something called SPD, a public display of affection. Now, as Muslims, we have a line between haya and showing love. Thoughts? In public.
Just be normal, isn't it? I mean, the things that, I think anything that is anything that, I would say anything that we would class as, what's the word I'm looking for? So anything that is sexual in nature, right? Kind of affection of a sexual nature should be avoided.
Okay.
I personally, cultures differ about this. Like Bengali culture would frown on it, but I don't see a problem with a couple holding hands.
Right.
But I definitely have, and I.
Not only Bangladeshi, Indian, Pakistani cultures as well has got that.
But standing standing outside the train station having a kiss, because you're seeing your husband off to work or something, you're seeing your wife off to work or something like that.
That's very filmy now.
Yeah, but it's kind of,
Excellent. Clear on that, inshallah.
What is it? Bollywood.
That's it. Jazakallah khair. Imams are always up to date.
Some things are just like, come on, guys.
I know.
I mean,
Sometimes there is something, we have to draw a line. Let's put it this way. We don't want to.
And why?
And we have
had we not been exposed to Western culture, we would never have aspired to these things. We would never have thought, oh, this is a really good thing to do. You just wouldn't. From a neutral position, people just wouldn't do that. Society no culture did this. No culture did this. Christian culture didn't do it. Jewish culture didn't do it. Hindu culture didn't do it. Muslim culture, nobody did it. This is a product of modernity. Now ask yourself, is that my role model? Is that who I want to aspire to be like?
And what kind of education or legacy are we creating for our next generation?
You know, haya is a natural inhibition. It's the idea of feeling shy. Things that, you know, and it's right to feel shy about, you know, kind of publicly. You just see what I mean?
Thank you very much for clarifying this. Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair for that. Obviously, this is an Islamic perspective and it's a show and where we discuss in light of Quran and Sunnah. Jazakallah khair.
Haya is all good, as the hadith.
That is it indeed. And of course, if any non-Muslim viewers are watching this program and if you have any question, then please feel free to fire it away. Our guest is there and inshallah we'll be more than happy to answer your questions. But let's start with our callers. Let's see who's in the line. Assalamu alaikum. Brother Umar, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Jazakallah khair for calling in. If you can kindly speak a little bit louder than usual, that will be great so we can hear you clearly in the studio. Let's try it. That's it. Good.
I have a question.
Please go ahead.
So the question is, a sister lives separately from her husband. Then her husband divorces her by giving 3 talaqs in one go. For her iddah period, does she have to complete her 3 menstrual cycles, or does her menstrual cycle, whilst living separately before the talaq, count towards the iddah period?
Thank you very much, Brother Ahmad. Shaykh, is it clear to you?
Yeah, it's the iddah is only after the talaq has been pronounced. The separation period doesn't count.
Is there any difference of opinion?
The difference of opinion isn't on this. There's no difference of opinion on this matter.
Okay.
The difference of opinion is on what does that talaq entail. So the vast majority of scholars would say 3 talaqs is 3 talaqs, and there's no way to reconcile that marriage. However, if the two of them wanted to reconcile, for example, if they don't reconcile, khalas, after 3 periods, you know, the marriage is over, right? But if they wanted to reconcile, then generally, you know, it's well known nowadays that Imam Taymiyyah's opinion, which Saudi ulama and many other ulama, contemporary ulama in particular, follow and recommend is the but controversial among others, is that 3 talaqs counts as 1. You understand? And therefore, reconciliation is possible. So I guess what people do in that situation really depends on their intention. People who have said it out of anger and want to reconcile will be told by one group of scholars, that you cannot reconcile.
Okay.
It's over. And other scholars will say, no, reconciliation is possible because you're 3 in one sitting or in one voice.
There are more details attached to it. And
so that's important. I wanted to mention that because this couple might want to reconcile.
Okay.
All right. And so I would say that you as a layperson, you as an ordinary Muslim, if you want to reconcile, and on the one hand you're being told you can't, all I will say, regardless of what my personal opinion is, that it would be permissible for you as a layperson to take an alternative opinion to save your marriage. However, please, for Allah's sake, don't do this 3 talaq business. There is no 3 talaq. To pronounce 3 talaqs in one go is haram. Okay. It's a sin. You can't do it. You should never do it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And just a caveat out there, obviously the information regarding talaq is generic and in general for educational purposes.
Nobody should use talaq as a weapon. Nobody should use talaq as a silencing mechanism. Nobody should use talaq in anger. Talaq is a word that should not be in anybody's vocabulary. It is a term with legal ramifications that should only be used when sitting around a table because of mediation, trying to resolve conflict, or when people are trying to go their separate ways. Now we want to go our separate ways. How do we do it? Okay, now there should be talaq. Talaq should not happen as in a reactionary way. This is a cultural phenomenon that is destroying families, and it has to stop.
Thank you. Very strong word. Very strong word there. I hope my viewers and myself, we have taken a note of it. And of course, as I was mentioning earlier, caveat, obviously the information given is on general. And of course, for educational purposes, for specific cases, there are more details to it. Please consult on a one-to-one basis a scholar that can listen to both the sides and then inshallah give an opinion. Moving on to our next caller. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Brother Ismail, thank you very much for calling in. Your question, please.
Brother, if I pray salat with my daughter, where does she stand?
Okay, where does she stand? Okay, excellent question. Any other questions?
Behind you.
Behind, okay.
Behind you.
Literally behind.
Ideally, the sunnah way is for her to stand behind as though she was on a separate row.
Okay.
Right?
Like-
if there is no space for that and you
Okay.
still want to do jama'ah, then she should stand a step behind.
Okay.
Like a step behind. But that you should only do that if there's no room. If there's no space.
Okay.
Otherwise you should follow
the house.
Otherwise you should follow the sunnah and she should be a row behind.
Just have to ask there, if the daughter is young, 5, 6.
Oh, yeah, then salah isn't obligatory upon her. Then
She can stand next.
Then it doesn't have any impact on your salah.
Okay.
Do you understand? And
Yes,
also if it's for the sake of teaching and so on. I'm talking about, you're performing salah proper, and your daughter is joining, and she wants to pray. She's not kind of playfully joining and so on.
Okay.
Children joining playfully. I mean, my son prays in my lap, so
Okay.
can't count that, right?
Jazakallah khair for that. Thank you very much for that. Moving on to our next caller. Let's see who's on the line. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Thank you very much for calling in. Your question, please.
Yeah, my question is that I'm doing a job which is like moving cars around, and what's it called? So, sometimes I'm 50 miles away from my house, sometimes 20 miles, sometimes 100 miles. So what I do is I pray at the right time, right? But I shorten my salah. Am I allowed to do that, or how does it work?
Okay. Qasr. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
we were talking about this earlier, right? I'm going to tell you the Hanafi view because that's the one I'm familiar with. I know there are some other opinions. The thing is, if you're moving cars around as part of your job, you're not necessarily traveling unless you make the intention to travel.
That's right.
Valid travel is if you make the intention to travel beyond 48 miles. So just keep that in mind. So if you travel beyond 48 miles with the intention to travel, if you wander past 48 miles, you can't do qasr because you're not traveling. You never made the intention to travel, right?
That's right.
If you're cruising with your mates and you've done 100 miles on the clock, but it's been local, you're not traveling.
That's right.
You understand? You're just chilling and joyriding with your mates, right? Traveling is traveling with the intention to travel beyond 48 miles, and when you leave the outskirts of your city, that's when you can do qasr. That's when you can shorten the prayer.
Okay.
You can't just shorten the prayer because you're out and about in a car, because then we'd all be shortening every day on our daily commute.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's right. Next question we'll take from WhatsApp. Sister Khadija. Assalamu alaikum. Am I supposed to have ablution to make prostration due to Sajdah Tilawa?
Yes. You have to have ablution for Sajdah Tilawa.
So let me clarify. Sajdah Tilawa, she's reading the glorious Quran. And
Sajdah Tilawa is when you recite a verse of sujood
yes,
in the
right.
Quran. There's 14 or so verses. And after those verses, it's sunnah to make a sujood.
That's right.
But for that sujood, you have to have wudu.
Okay. Difference of opinion in this matter?
Well, there may well be. There often is.
Yes.
But
Okay. Jazakallah khair for clarifying that. Next question. I assume it's a sister who's asking the question. Why men are not allowed to wear gold and silk?
gold and silk.
Yeah.
Because the Prophet ﷺ forbade it.
That's one line answer.
One line answer.
Do we need to look for logic here?
No, the Prophet. Well, if you want a logic, then it seems clear that the Prophet ﷺ made up, and to the issues nowadays that we all are witnessing and are wondering how in the world did we get here as a human society, will actually now clarify the wisdom. The Prophet ﷺ made a very specific point about making sure that the genders, male and female, are customarily separate in terms of some of the things that they do, and that's things that are clearly conventionally female, men shouldn't do, and things that are clearly conventionally male, women shouldn't do, right? So the reason why it may well be that gold is fine for men, logically, but the reason why gold and silk are so strictly prohibited is because the Prophet expressly prohibited it. But within that kind of domain of things prohibited for men but not for women and so on, these differences, if you want to observe a pattern, right, and apply a bit of induction, then what you will find is that the Prophet ﷺ made a point of trying to create a culture where men were men who followed certain male stereotypes and women remained women following female stereotypes, and he forbade each resembling the other. And one of the harshest hadiths about this is Allah curses the man or the men who try to resemble women, i.e. who imitate women.
It's a clear hadith.
It's a clear hadith.
Authentic
لَعَنَ
hadith.
اللَّهُ الْمُتَشَبِّهِينَ مِنَ الرِّجَالِ بِالنِّسَاءِ. Allah curses the men, those among men who imitate, i.e. take on the traits of women. وَالْمُتَشَبِّهَاتْ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ بِالرِّجَالِ. And women who take on male traits and try to imitate men.
Okay.
Right? And what that means is that you're deliberately doing things that are stereotypically or customarily female to want to imitate them. As well as, just so there's lots and lots of things that the fuqaha then comment on based on that principle. Does that make sense? That there are these cultural separations. Take those separations away, and what you have is what we see today.
True. Very clear on that. And of course, the guidance is according to the Quran and Sunnah. And Shaykh, thank you very much for making it very clear using the hadith. Next question. Assalamu alaikum. Now, this is an interesting question. Imad Hisham on YouTube is asking the question: if I were to call out my favorite sports team for not being good enough without mentioning any of the players' name, would I still be classified as backbiting them?
Well, clearly not, if you're not mentioning the names.
Yeah. And he's talking not about the individual, as a sports team, okay? So I'm sure you know what happened. We love football here, and if a team doesn't perform well in the Premier League,
and lost. Sorry, guys.
You had to put that in, didn't you?
I was noticing my nephews and their dad.
Yeah.
My nephews support Liverpool.
Okay.
And the dad supports Man U.
I see.
And just before I left, I was seeing some really, really interesting dynamics.
That's
so I
it.
thought, okay.
So now we're taking that to football, and we're asking, is that part of backbiting? Now, let me understand. Backbiting, can it be
backbiting
about an organized team?
Backbiting is to mention your brother in a manner that... Or sister, in a manner that he or she would dislike.
Okay.
Right? Regardless of whether it's true, even if it's true. Meaning, it's only backbiting if it's true. If it's not true, then it's gossiping and slandering. Does that make sense?
That's
right. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ himself clarified this.
Okay.
Right? In كان فيه ما تقول فقد اغتبته. If it is true, if they truly have that fault that you are discussing, then only is it backbiting. If it's not true, then it's slander. It's a worse sin. A different kind of sin and a worse sin.
That's right.
So it's when you criticize somebody for something that is truly in them, but they wouldn't like you talking about it behind their back. So in a way, if you're just commenting on football and the performance of a team, I don't think that is something that is part of the custom of football.
That's correct. But again, as you mentioned in the beginning when we talked about whether language should be appropriate, let's be careful.
Well, that goes without saying, right?
Yeah.
So I honestly think that the conversation about backbiting should move away from something as trivial as football, and we should be more careful about backbiting each other, because we tend to do that a lot.
That's right.
And it's a major sin.
That's very true, very true. Next question from WhatsApp. We'll be taking this question. Assalamu alaikum. Is it true that all riba is interest, but all riba is interest, but not all interest is riba?
God.
It's a bit technical there, I can see.
I know where this question is coming from.
I know, we can understand that, yeah.
It's an opinion. This is an opinion that some scholars are kind of putting out there nowadays, that what is considered interest in today's convention doesn't always fit what is technically riba in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and people are making certain distinctions on that basis. Right?
Usury.
Yeah. So, most scholars don't agree with that distinction because of the fact that most forms of interest do meet the description of riba. However, it's possible in theory. It's possible. So think of it like this, right? Over here, the substance of the transaction, the nature of the transaction is what matters, not what people call it, right? So you can call it whatever you can call it whatever you like. You might call it profit, right? But the way you configure the transaction, it's exactly the same as.
So it's not the label that is important here, it's the nature, the way the transaction is dealt with or handled, what makes it permissible or haram. Is that right?
That's exactly.
And sometimes we also see, and we were just discussing.
So if in theory something was labeled interest, but the nature of the transaction it obviously showed that it's actually not riba but something else, right? Then it wouldn't be riba. If the transaction is clearly riba, but it's labeled something else, then it's riba. It just depends on the configuration of the transaction.
Now, this is where I want to ask you this question here. Now, sometime we discussed it before the program as well. We do fatwa shopping. Now, I already have a opinion. I'm just trying to find out a scholar that agrees with that view, say it facilitates or makes it easy for me to carry out a particular transaction or dealing. Now, should we be looking into that, or should we be finding out what Allah and His Rasul has said rather than what I think that makes my life easy?
These are
putting the burden on scholar.
So this is something of a we're jumping into extremes. Fatwa shopping or choosing between the fatwas of people doesn't mean that the alternative is following Allah and His Messenger. Because if you're saying follow Quran and Sunnah, it may well be that you don't get your answer in Quran and Sunnah. Almost everything in the Quran and Sunnah is explained. Its intent, its specific intent, particularly its contemporary application, is explained by ulama. As such, everybody follows ulama. This idea of follow Quran and Sunnah that really only works in the most clear issues, right? And generally, the principle is there is no following of scholars in matters that are completely unambiguous in Islam. For example, you can't follow anyone for La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. Right? You can't say, yeah, I believe in La ilaha illallah because Imam Abu Hanifa says so. There is no taqleed, there is no following of scholars on matters that are completely unambiguous. But the moment you move into what does this precisely mean, what is its application today, inevitably people seek how the Sahaba understood it at the time of the Prophet ﷺ.
Correct.
How the Sahaba students understood it. And from there you end up with the madhahib, the ulama and so on. Interpretation is part and parcel of the fabric of our deen. That's why we have madhahib. So I think we need to avoid sloganism and just approach the Sharia as it is. Now, if there are legitimate different opinions of scholars on a particular issue, my advice to people is that you may seek an alternative opinion if you are trying to address a problem in your life. If you are trying to deal with a very particular need in your life, as a result of which you feel that you need to find out if there is another opinion because you're struggling with something. You're suffering as a result of something.
Then sit down with a scholar and then find out the correct opinion.
You should avoid doing it for no other purpose than to kind of make money or,
make your lifestyle into a luxury once.
You understand?
Okay,
I want to take an easier opinion on music because I just want
we'll come to that. We'll come to that.
My head up and down,
We'll come to that.
I want to play loud music in my car.
Jazakallah khair, inshallah. Jazakallah. Inshallah, we'll continue our discussion. You're watching Ask Eman. In a few moments, we'll be back. Thank you very much. Welcome back. You're watching Ask Eman live on Eman Channel on Sky 757. All the necessary contact details are displayed at the bottom of your screen. And of course, we're also live on our social media platforms. I'm in conversation with Shaykh Adduha. Shaykh, we were very close to a break, so that's why I had to cut you off there. Apology for that. Let's start from where we left. So it's basically for the viewers who've just joined in case if they have missed the first segment. But of course, our viewers can always go back online to our YouTube channel and Facebook page, and you will find the full video there. Now, when people say, I follow only Quran and Sunnah, does it imply, we were having that conversation, some people may say, does it imply other people are not following the Quran and Sunnah? So you were talking on this matter.
Yeah, I was saying these are slogans. These are just sound bites. There's no layperson who actually literally follows Quran and Sunnah, like opens the Quran, sees the verse and follows it, except for in matters that have got nothing to do with law, Islamic law. Everybody follows Quran and Sunnah in things that are unambiguous and things that are outside of the purview of fiqh, of Islamic jurisprudence, and are not ambiguities of aqidah.
You talked about music?
Right? No, I was saying that if there are alternative opinions on a particular issue,
okay,
and you asked the question was about fatwa shopping.
That's right.
I said that avoid fatwa shopping if the only thing that motivates you to pick opinions is you just messing around.
Okay.
I just want to, I want to, my point is that you just want to, it's for the sake of enjoyment. For me, that kind of trivializes the Sharia, which is supposed to be followed with a bit more seriousness, right?
That's right.
However, if you really go down to what the fiqh actually, what the jurisprudence actually says, the lay person is allowed to follow a legitimate opinion that exists from a scholar that he normally doesn't follow, or he or she doesn't normally follow. Strictly speaking, it is permissible. What I'm saying, though, is that while you may know that an alternative opinion exists, whether you follow it or not may well be a matter of your taqwa.
Okay.
Right? It may well be that the majority of scholars consider this to be impermissible. I'm going to be careful here, for example.
That's right.
Right? However, if it is a need, a necessity, a difficulty, etc., then in those situations, really, even the ulama themselves should be pointing towards opinions that solve their problems, if those opinions are legitimate. However, if it's an opinion that isn't based on any classical scholarship, it's just people with zero scholarly credentials are coming up with these views, it's kind of, it's modernist. What I mean by that is basically, it's coming out of people who are basically Western scholars of Islam, who really have no credentials in terms of Sharia. If it comes from legitimate scholarship...
We can't paint everyone with the same brush. Obviously, there are
we can't. But what I'm trying to say is there are opinions that have really no basis in scholarship. They're just... It's almost like tabloidism. And there are opinions that are based in legitimate scholarship, where groups of scholars, councils have sat and deliberated over a mas'ala and come up with an opinion that is different to perhaps what you're used to, or perhaps what people in the past are used to. You should differentiate between these. Opinions well formulated by scholars or groups of scholars should be respected.
Okay, thank you very much. I agree indeed on that.
Opinions you read about on some Facebook post that don't
or any social media
that don't sound right, or social media, or that kind of sound a bit weird or different.
Okay.
You should
so basically, in other words,
ilm
needs to be obtained, not just what we heard or hearsay.
So let me put it this way then, if you really want me to clarify this, right? Ilm has to be obtained from people, and you need to know who the people are and what their credentials are.
The person we're taking the knowledge from.
Ideas and opinions floating about on social media, and you just know of it as an opinion, but you don't know whose it is.
Similarly, when it comes to medicine or legal matters, we take lessons and lectures from a qualified person who's got standing.
Allah tells us to follow Quran, Sunnah, and people of authority, i.e. ulama. If you don't know whose opinion it is, who are you following? If you don't know who the opinion belongs to, where the opinion comes from, you're not following Quran, you're not following Sunnah, you're not following ulama.
Clear.
Got it?
Clear in this matter. And just to clarify there, of course, when Shaykh mentioned about the scholars, obviously we're not naming any scholar. It's not against any particular scholar. Just before we get a question thrown at us through WhatsApp or YouTube channel, it's a general comment. Of course, we've got respected ulama within our Western countries and within our Western society.
Saying follow the ulama.
Follow the
ulama.
ulama.
They have to be ulama.
That's it,
can't
exactly.
be something floating around on WhatsApp.
Thank you very much for that. It's just we had to clarify that because we know we always get questions. Alhamdulillah, we've got viewers that are always very close to our show, and we get a lot of questions. So I just wanted to clarify our position. And of course, Shaykh never meant that. All ulamas are to be respected, and if we have disagreement, we can have a chat with them. We can understand it better, and then perhaps take our opinion or form an opinion. Now let's move on to our next caller. Let's see who's next on the line. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Brother Ayan, you're live on Ask Eman. If you can kindly turn the television volume down and you can listen on the phone directly and speak to us directly, that would be great. Brother Ayan, Assalamu alaikum. We'll come back to Brother Ayan, inshallah. Let's get this technical sorted. Let's move on to this question. Sister Maimuna is asking why there is a difference in witr salah in Hanafi compared to other madhabs.
Like all of the differences of opinion, the fuqaha understood the references in the hadith in different ways, giving rise to, they're basically different interpretations of the same sources.
Okay.
Right? Some ahadith prefer one source over others do the opposite. This is exactly how all differences materialize, right? That's the reason for not just this issue, but all differences of opinion.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Excellent.
And I generally advise people in matters of worship, in matters of ibadah, because really, except for very rare situations, needs and necessities and difficulties are not quite in the picture. When they are, you can do things differently. I advise people to consistently follow a school.
Okay.
A school. That doesn't mean it has to be the four. All I'm saying is follow a school.
Okay.
Right? The four are the popular ones. But if you were following, if you were taught, for example, according to the Salafi school, which is a kind of modification of the Hanbali madhab according to more contemporary scholars,
okay,
fine. But for the sake of consistency, particularly in matters of ibadah, because of the fact that in matters of ibadah, you're not a mujtahid, and ibadah is what you render unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it should be consistent. It shouldn't be some confused mess.
Thank you very much. And common sense in worldly matters, when we have to listen to the expert, when it comes to deen, we have to listen to expert if we are not qualified, of course. Next question, but before that, let's see if Ayan is back online. Assalamu alaikum. Are you back with us? Can you hear us clearly?
Yes.
Oh, thank you very much. That's a very young caller. And you have taken your parents' permission to call live into the studio. So what's your question?
I'm going to secondary school.
Okay.
And I want to go to madrasa, but I'm not sure if I should go to normal madrasa school or boarding school.
Okay. Shaykh, is the question clear to you?
Yeah.
MashaAllah. Once again, thank you very much for asking such an important question. And of course, once again, for viewers who've just tuned in, our young viewers has sought their parents' permission and has called live into the studio and asked a very important question. Let's see what Shaykh has to say.
Can't make your mind up, huh?
Huh?
Ayan can't make his mind up. Well, the difference really is that when you go to one of these boarding schools or Islamic seminaries or Darul Ulooms, then you have a more immersive Islamic studies environment. You'll get to memorize the Quran or study Islam full time. Those opportunities usually don't exist in a non-full-time capacity, right? Or in a non-boarding capacity in most towns and cities. In places like London, in big cities, some places do offer day opportunities, but not for really young children at secondary age, right? So most of the Islamic boarding schools, they take children in at secondary age. At the age of 11, some of them take them at the age of 13. Now, whether that's a good option for you or not really depends on you, your background, your parents' choices and things like that, and which boarding school you're looking into. I really can't give a generic answer to that, but it's a perfectly legitimate choice. If you want to do it, look into it. If you feel like you can do it, you don't mind living away from home and so on.
Parents need to look into it.
Parents need to look into it properly, do a bit of research, go visit different institutions.
Speak to people who have been through those journey.
Exactly.
Okay, Jazakallah khair for that. Moving on swiftly to our next caller. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Thank you very much, my dear sister. Your question, please.
First of all, I'm really enjoying watching the program.
Thank you.
My question is that if you have Christian neighbors or friends who you've known for a long, long time, and one of them passes away, and they say that their funeral is going to be in the church, first of all, are you allowed to go and attend? And the other thing is that what's the best way as a Muslim to give your respects to someone who passed away of another religion?
Thank you very much. Two very important questions, and thank you very much for your kind acknowledgement and kind words. Shaykh, over to you.
Yeah, so don't participate in anything religious, any ritual religious practices.
Okay.
Really, the main thing is really be there to console the living, right? The dead have died, they've passed away. Be there to console the living. And according to the vast majority of scholars, it isn't permissible to make dua for maghfirah for somebody who apparently has died without iman.
Okay.
Right? So there's various evidences forwarded for that, but that's the view of most scholars. So we don't really have to get into that. The main thing to think about is really it's about consoling the people that the deceased has left behind.
Yeah, it's a difficult period for the family.
That you can do in your own social capacity and so on. You offer condolences, as we all customarily do. If you feel that going to the funeral or something like that is socially expected and it might sour relationships if you didn't go and so
Especially
on.
if it's a neighbor or,
I would say if you think there might be religious rituals involved and so on, Christian rituals and so on and so forth, then,
or any religion.
And that makes you feel uncomfortable, then you don't have to go. Right? It's not, nobody's obliging you to go to your funeral, but you should, what's probably more important is to be there for your neighbor.
Okay.
In their time of need, and and give condolences and cook food for them, and and give
do whatever you can
do whatever you can.
Yeah.
Do the things that matter.
Okay.
Right. Everything else
that can make a difference.
The rituals are symbolic, right?
Okay.
Do the things that matter. About the rituals, you can't participate in any religious rituals of any kind, right?
And that is
any
other religion.
Anything that is just customary of a non-religious nature, you make a decision based on how much of it needs to be done or doesn't need to be done. Avoid things that are religiously symbolic, religiously ritualistic. And as general advice, be there for them, because that's the most important thing. Right?
Okay. Is that the whole Islamic approach in general?
Be there for them. Console them, help them.
At the end of the day, we are all humans and we have to be there.
At a human level, at an empathic level, absolutely. You as a Muslim neighbor should do more than any other. Does that make sense? And you should stand out because of that.
And that could be one of the way of giving da'wah as well.
Yeah, not because you showed your face at the funeral or the graveyard, but because of what
you care for your neighbors. Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much once again, sister, for calling in and asking such an important question. If you still have any further question or clarification required, then please feel free to call us back. Moving on swiftly to our next caller. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Thank you very much. What's your question?
I have two questions. My first question is, someone clarify, what was Imam Abu Hanifa's belief regarding Hadith and Sunnah? Did he believe Hadith and Sunnah were synonymous? That's my first question. The second question is, did Imam Abu Hanifa reject Sahih Ahad Hadith if it went against the Quran?
Okay. This requires a lot of discussion and debate, and live TV program is not enough. But may I know what's the reason for asking that question?
Because I was always taught that Hadith and Sunnah is the same. So you read books, they were saying that whoever rejects the Sunnah is a deviant, it's haram to reject the Sunnah. I'm aware that the ulama throughout the ages...
Are you clear? Both the questions clear, yeah? Okay, thank you very much. Shaykh is clear. Let's see what he has to say.
Well, the answer is no.
Okay.
The answer is no. He didn't. No scholar knowingly discards the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Every scholar's opinions is based on an honest and sincere attempt to follow the Quran and the Sunnah. However, usually where it seems like there are divergent views, the divergent views are not about them ignoring the Quran and the Sunnah and doing something else. The divergent views come out of interpreting words and sentences that are ambiguous in the Quran and Sunnah, or ahadith that seem to tell the ahadith that have been transmitted that maybe from a different period of the Sunnah that seem to have an apparently contradictory message. So these have to be consolidated. In their attempt to consolidate, sometimes ulama have different opinions. This happened right from this doesn't just apply to Imam Abu Hanifa. This question isn't unique to Imam Abu Hanifa. This applies to the Sahaba. The phenomenon of different divergent opinions started with the Sahaba. So I think basically focusing on Abu Hanifa is itself erroneous, because the phenomenon of having different interpretations about hadith and as well as verses of the Quran is something that is a linguistic issue, right? And as well as issue of how a hadith are transmitted, which was something that affected the earliest generation, the Sahaba themselves. And the reason why we know that there's guidelines in the Sunnah for how to deal with this and that different opinions can be tolerated is because the Prophet ﷺ tolerated it while he was alive.
Okay.
While he was alive, he tolerated it. So whatever the question is about Imam Abu Hanifa, it applies equally to Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad, Imam
All the scholars.
Malik,
Okay.
the Sahaba who were the scholars. Remember, the Sahaba weren't all scholars. Among the Sahaba were scholars. Among the Sahaba were ordinary lay Sahaba.
I see.
Right? So scholars among the Sahaba also disagreed about interpretations. In fact, most of the disagreements of the Imams ultimately find its original reference with the Sahaba.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you very much for that. Next question. What are the rights of daughter to parents after marriage compared to sons after marriage on YouTube?
The rights of a daughter.
Yeah, a daughter to parents after marriage.
So the daughter's duties to her parents.
That's
after
right.
Marriage. I mean, they remain the same. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا. Give your parents good company in a customarily good way. And this is not gender specific.
Okay. Is there any major difference between son looking after the parents and daughter looking after the
There's the certain responsibilities that are unique to sons and others are unique to daughters.
Okay.
Generally, the responsibilities of guardianship, like usually people make a big deal out of guardianship because they only think of guardianship in the context of marriage and in the context of the guardianship of a wife, right? But guardianship is broader, right? There's a category of relatives known as asaba, who generally are male. Male relatives have guardianship responsibilities towards the whole family, including parents if parents do not have the means to take care of themselves. This includes financial responsibility. That responsibility falls upon the men in the family.
Okay.
Or if not, if there is no male guardianship, if there are no sons, for example, it's just daughters, and they are financially capable, then it falls upon them as well. My point is, principally it falls upon everybody equally, but upon the people who generally are the earners in Islamic culture, which is the men, they have the greater responsibility.
Clear. In 1 minute, if you can answer this, a question asked by Brother Tofa on Facebook. What are the rules and condition of one who intends to marry a pious person?
Sorry, say that again.
Rules and condition if someone intends to marry a pious spouse.
Find a pious spouse.
Anything else?
Make that your most important requirement. If needs be, if it clashes with another requirement. You find piety, you don't find the right level of money. You find piety, you don't find maybe the degree that you want
education,
or the education that you wanted them to have, and the two clash, then prioritize piety. That's the Prophet ﷺ's advice.
Simple answer. Jazakallah khair. I had to rush you there. Thank you very much once again for giving us your valuable time. We hope to see you more often, inshallah, on Ask Eman.
Inshallah.
I know you're busy, but Jazakallah khair once again. And to our viewers, thank you very much for asking questions. Our callers through YouTube, WhatsApp, a lot of questions. Inshallah, we'll continue our conversation on Friday and Saturday. However, tomorrow is Ask Eman Urdu. So if you'd like to ask a question in Urdu, then please feel free to watch us back again here on this channel at 8 p.m. Apologies to the callers and viewers. We couldn't take all the calls. Inshallah, you'll call us in our next episode tomorrow. Of course, Ask Eman Urdu, and after that, we're back again on Friday and Saturday. If you would like to watch the repeat of the program, then online you can definitely find it. Until next time, Subhanak Allahumma bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.